So the topic tonight is revolution, and the debate resolution that provides a point of debate is this: resolved, America needs another revolution. So we have 4 reds and 4 blues with a wide variety of opinions on what revolution might mean. Some are in favor of revolution, but with various definitions. Some are opposed to revolution with other recommendations. So in these speeches, you're going to hear a lot of ideas. And we hope that you leave here inspired to continue these conversations in a way that truly helps the people of this country. All right, staff, are we ready to start? Anything else from Cliff? Hearing none, we're gonna start. Okay, so our first speaker is David Iwinski, and you should be seeing him come up on the spotlight in a moment. So David, look alive. David Iwinski has worked in international business management in Asia and Europe over 34 years. He is the managing director of Blue Water Growth, LLC. That's an international business advisory firm focusing on global supply chain and business development. He's lived in China, he's lived in India, got his BA in literature and music, I believe percussion, and his JD from the University of Pittsburgh. He has 7 rescued standard poodles, and on the debate team, we have met all of them on Zoom. David, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's start with the glorious and irreplaceable Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Long sentence, but what a humdinger. I love it. It is our right to alter or abolish it. Now let's see whether the condition of our current government has become destructive of those ends. Government spending is out of control. We will never recover from the trillions in debt being loaded upon us. Arbitrary and crushing rules push down upon business and make it virtually impossible to stay in business and to make a profit. There are so many rules promulgated by our government that control our everyday life. If you devoted the entirety of your life to reading them, you couldn't do it. And the list grows by day. And finally, we've come to such a place that the executive branch has declared that unless we choose to follow the edicts handed down to us by the executive branch, that we will face crushing financial consequences. President Biden says he's growing impatient. And if we don't follow his orders, we'll suffer. Now, is this what the founders had in mind? Oh, I don't think so. Now, what we used to do to fix this is go to the ballot box. But as of late, Democrats and Republicans both seem to have come to the realization this is actually not such a good solution. After 2016, Democrats spent millions and millions of dollars and 3 years trying to prove that that ballot box was unreliable, unsafe, and hacked. And guess what? Come 2020, an enormous number of Republicans feel exactly the same, that was hacked. So if you can't trust a ballot box, what is left? Well, revolution. Now, this is not a revolution that seeks chaos, anarchy, but restoration of the perfect constitutional representative government where freedoms and privileges of Americans of any color and any religion are equally applied and government is kept in check. It doesn't have to be violent, but how might that happen? Forget your silly notion of Proud Boys and the militias marching across with their ARs. It's ridiculous. Those organizations have already been infiltrated by the FBI, DEA, BEFT, and every other 3-letter acronym organization. What it's going to be instead is some individual that's just had enough, does something unwise. But then the central government may say, our moment is at hand. As Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. And trust me, they won't. They'll overreact. And the president at that time, could be Biden, could be Harris, who knows, might say, you know what? Now we're going to take all those guns, hand them over. And let me tell you, when that happens, they will have dramatically miscalculated. We should have learned from Vietnam. We should have learned from Afghanistan. We should have learned from the Soviets. Armed populace cannot so easily be suppressed. This won't be a planned, structured revolution with leaders, and it will be messy, it will be chaotic. There will be no leaders to seek out. But the more the government cracks down, the more the resistance will grow. And it will be a revolution. I personally pray it doesn't come to that. But you know, a lot of the population has already come to that conclusion. Last summer, a lot of our population that believed that the ballot box was no longer a redress for their ills decided to burn down cities, billions in damage, injury, death, because they no longer trusted the system. When the revolution comes, we've got nobody to blame but ourselves. Let's close with the wise words of Thomas Jefferson, who said, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure." Governments and citizens alike should think carefully, lest they soon be neck deep in such manure. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will look to the panel for a question. Panelists, if you would like to ask a question, you can either raise your hand right where I can see it, or use your electronic Zoom hand. Looking for a question from a panelist. Silas, go ahead and ask your question. And by the way, Silas, you know this as Braver Angel, but for everybody else's benefit, we're looking for concise questions that are not speeches, that are questions of curiosity, and that are directed to me as Madam Chair about what the speaker said. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Mr. Iwinski for his speech. As many such debates will draw people into, I feel like Mr. Iwinski was using a bit of hyperbole. He said it was impossible for business to make profit. Isn't it the case that most America has some of the most successful, most profitable businesses in the world, even under this vast regulatory system that he thinks is choking us to death?
And David, you have 1 minute to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Silas, for an excellent question. Actually, much of the profit for these mega corporations that squeeze out the little guy are in fact because they are in connection, dare I say, cahoots with the government. They are part of the same oligarchy that makes the rules and determines, and by the way, those are the same people that fund these elections. Money in PACs comes from large corporations, many of whom are tied to the government. If you look at the disasters in Afghanistan and Vietnam and others, who ended up the only victors? The people that made the weapons, which is what Eisenhower warned us of. Thank you.
All right. And now I'm going to move to a question from the audience, and my Q&A panel is helping me with that.
Cynthia, which question would you like to have asked?
Pardon?
Which question would you like to have asked?
Well, let's see. I have the first question on that list that you have given me would be fine. Question number 41. We had a lot of questions submitted before the debate.
So we would like Barbara from Lindenwood, New Jersey. If you're present, let's see if we can find you. And
so Barbara, you can, I believe you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I think we have to allow her to unmute, if we can find her.
There she is. You can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, ma'am. So the question was, when we talk revolution, you know, we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we talk about the Scientific Revolution.
Yes.
But do you see only armed revolution? Do we have to go out murdering our fellow Americans to make a change?
Thank you. David, you have 1 minute to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Barbara, for this really insightful question. Well, those other revolutions you noted, industrial and so forth, were revolutions in knowledge and expansion of our capacity. As far as a peaceful revolution, there are many ways that we could accomplish this. Some would argue the Tea Party was the start of a peaceful revolution. Some may say the contract with America was such. and maybe even Ross Perot. But we are at a time where the government crackdowns and their restrictions are particularly heavy-handed, particularly following the results of 2020 and the distrust in government. I don't think that any patriot I know wants to murder anyone, much less fellow Americans. But I think at the same time, some people may feel pressured as they do not see any other traditional outlets working for them. Thank you.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. There's the gavel. Jazz hands for our first speaker. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to our second speaker. This is Ellen Urbani. Ellen Urbani trained in medical psychology. She has been a consultant for FEMA and for the Department of Homeland Security. She has organized dozens of peaceful protests. Last summer, she was shot by a federal officer while standing in a Black Lives Matter protest. She is now part of a civil suit with Black Lives Matter protesters. She is the author of 2 books, as well as essays for Time Magazine and the New York Times. She lives on a farm, and last year during the Oregon wildfires, she and her team helped evacuate and rescue over 20,000 animals in 4 days. Ellen.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. I am going to address the concept of revolution, but revolutionary change as opposed to, for instance, an armed revolution. And I would love to debate tonight the merits of revolutionary change to our social structure, and most specifically, some of the issues of social justice and equity that are closest to my heart. However, at their most basic, to me, nearly every justice and equity issue, from racial and gender inequality to pro or anti-immigration sentiments, boils down to this: a power struggle between individuals and or between groups. What social science and psychology teach us is that we feel more powerful when we feel safer or better off than those around us. We need some other to be down to feel safely up. It's that tendency I want to discuss, which is essentially how Americans accumulate, hold, and wield power over others, as I believe that disparity is one of the greatest threats to our present republic. Consistent with that, and perhaps even more importantly, I believe that without a revolutionary change in attitude or perspective preceding efforts to enact specific legislative or social change, we'll be doomed to fail in our efforts to right this or any ship. I suggest to you that Americans have been sold a false narrative, that a powerful or big government is the enemy. In fact, government has been the greatest promulgator and agent of social equality in our country's history. It serves as the means by which power is distributed among every voter, among activists of every stripe, and among business entities. Were it not for government intervention and broad supervision of practices, effectively, yet ironically, initiated by many in the party that now bemoans big government, slavery would still exist. Women and minorities would be subject to even worse unredressed abuse and discrimination. Only as a collective group, which is at its most essential what government is, the means by which a collective group acts, does our citizenry have the power to protect and promote the rights of the less powerful against those with or hoarding power. Now, it strikes me that many of us from both sides of the aisle have lost sight of the fact that government has been the greatest vehicle to establish and maintain social justice. It is government enacted laws that prevent restaurants nationwide from refusing service based on race. It is government enacted laws that protect people against sexual harassment in the workplace. Imagine a world where those sorts of laws didn't exist or only existed in certain states. It's not corporations and the powerful who would suffer, but the least powerful among us. We need a revolution and awareness among the American public of the specific power and benefits of the government we've constructed for ourselves. At the end of the day, government arises from the governed in a democracy and is the manifestation of our collective consensus and will. And the will that initiated the very development of this country was to provide a haven for those who felt underprivileged and oppressed. The very freedoms our government was designed to protect were those of the least powerful. And I am deeply concerned by trends among certain factions of the modern conservative movement to stifle social justice by convincing the masses that the government is a boogeyman here to take away rather than equalize the distribution of rights. Consider Ronald Reagan's famous statement that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I argue nothing could be further from the truth, and that a revolutionary perspective change regarding government's capacity to protect and lift us all up is the foundation on which all other social and legislative changes must be based.
Thank you. Panelists, do you have a question for Ellen? Looking for your hand raised in the window or your electronic hand. Steve House, you can ask your question to me about Ellen's speech.
Madam Chair, I would just ask the speaker to share with us who referees the government itself. If the government is the referee that has provided all the things that she described, who keeps them in check at this point?
Thank you. 1 minute to answer.
At first blush, my answer would be that actually the people do. I believe that in a democracy, in a republic like ours, voter representation is how we put into play our government and our government practices. It is why I'm gravely concerned by some of the efforts I see to gerrymander districts or to alter voting practices, to make voting more difficult for certain populations, because I believe in that case we are hobbling the referee you're referring to.
Thank you. And a question from the audience. We are going to invite Francis to ask a question. Not present. Okay. All right, let's see. So I'll go ahead and ask a question. And that is, what does the speaker believe is the best next step toward these kind of changes?
In many ways, I think power equals money. And I believe that wealth inequity in our country is one of the biggest hindrances to effecting social justice and generous equity throughout our nation. And so I am of the opinion that wealth redistribution is one of the first steps that needs to be undertaken if we are capable and when we are capable of achieving this perspective change that I spoke about.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for our speaker. Our next speaker is Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson is a retired American history teacher living in Little Rock. He is an entrepreneur working to monetize 4 US patents. He has skied from the highest ski lift in the world. He loved riding horses as a kid. And so if you see anyone skiing and you can still see trees, you know you're not at the highest ski lift in the world. Alan, you have 4 minutes. Go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here tonight as a Braver Angels member to talk about revolution, our American revolution, to be more specific. Let's remember tonight, as this debate unfolds, that our Braver Angels organization is founded on marriage counseling principles. And America is a lot like a marriage. It actually is a marriage, and a strange marriage. Our citizen vow is to honor and cherish freedom among each other, but we have lost our way. It is time for a revolution to confess our selfishness that got us here. Therefore, I ask you tonight to agree with the resolution. America needs another revolution versus selfishness. In our Declaration of Independence, we vow to each other to protect life, our liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a solemn vow. In it, we acknowledge our Creator. We refer to him as our supreme judge, as nature's God. And in the concluding line, we pledge, saying exactly as in a wedding, referring to God a 4th time, pledging with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Just to be clear, I blame myself and my age generation for most of the trouble we see today. We cheered on drugs, sex, rock and roll, and we have reaped the whirlwind. In exchange, we've given our country divorce, addiction, disease, and 60 million abortions. That number is equivalent to the entire school-age population in the country today, as if all gone tomorrow because of my generation. So yes, we need a revolution to return to the love of freedom our country is founded on. Our citizen vow is liberty and justice for all. Notice it's justice, not social justice. Social justice is a completely different animal. It's a wolf, a deviously deceptive twist on our vow being injected into our national bloodstream. That's the lie I helped tell. In my 20s, I learned my hippie heroes were lying to me and lying to the country about their love for our country. They actually wanted to overthrow it. They still do. We used that catchphrase, social justice, then 50 years ago to make it seem so respectable and patriotic. But it wasn't, and it's in full flower today. And it's time to call us out on it. We can look back on social justice movements in France. A German philosopher rewrote it saying they didn't really kill enough of their people. The Russians took them up on that, and more millions died. And then the Nazis, and then now communist China today. Social justice philosophy is injustice. And so I say, fight for our marriage. It's worth it. It's priceless. Uphold liberty, oppose tyranny. America needs another revolution.
Thank you. A question from the panel. All right, David, you can ask your question to me, Chair.
Madam Chair, I would like to see if the panelists could give some depth and amplification to how the reconciliation of this divorce would occur and what has to happen to rebind us to those principles of commitment to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Thank you. 1 minute to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I think I would say honesty will go a long way in coming to grips with the trouble we face in our country. We're all good at accusing each other. And I think we're best served in, as we like to say in Braver Angels, being authentic. And authentic means being honest to say, look, these are the troubles I've caused. And this is what I'm willing to do to make our country the country we're committed to be. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and the goodness for all of us.
Thank you. And now a question from our audience. Bernie, you have a question? You can unmute and ask your question to me as the chair. Okay, I'm not seeing Bernie, so I can read that question. All right, let's see. There it is. So Bernie's question was, who is the revolution going to fight and what exactly are the two sides? You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. the struggle is against tyranny. Every once in a while, people say, go read something, and we rarely do, but I ask you, go read the abuses in the Declaration of Independence. I count 29 of them, but they are a list of abuses of tyranny that we dealt with 100 years ago. And they're the same exact abuses of tyranny we see today. We listed in our Constitution the top 5 of them. The First Amendment lists them. Don't impose on worship, speech, press, assembly, or petition. Those are the elements of tyranny that we're fighting against, and we see it today alive and well. And so those are the elements of tyranny that we need to be aware of, and it's a threat to our freedom, and we want to stand up for our freedom and our country.
All right, and with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for our speaker. Our next speaker is Silas Kulkarni. Silas started his career teaching math to 8th graders in Washington, D.C. and in Harlem, New York. He led them to record-breaking success. Then he became an education consultant. He was executive director and co-founder of Teaching Lab. That's a nonprofit that was dedicated to improving instruction for underserved students. Most recently, he served as senior fellow for public discourse for Braver Angels, did a fantastic job. Silas, you're on.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. For those who know me and how passionately I care about issues, including social justice, it may seem strange that I'm speaking on the side against revolution today, but I think that passion and in pursuit of a cause you believe in is in no way equivalent to desiring to tear down the system. I'm going to go back historically, and I appreciate that there's a history professor or a history teacher on the call with us today. But I'm going to go back historically because I also really enjoy history. I listened to a podcast called The Revolutions Podcast. I actually really recommend it to anybody who's interested to learn more about revolutions. There's a guy named Mike Duncan. It goes through all kinds of revolutions. Very fun historical podcast. But one of the things you'll notice if you study up about revolutions is that most of them go very poorly. Most of them result in a worse form of tyranny than the one they tried to throw off. Usually a lot of bloodshed. And then typically a reactionary movement that then reinstates a dictatorship or some kind of tyrannical power afterwards. Or in some cases, the revolution, quote unquote, succeeds, but the noble aims for which it was undertaken are perverted to extremely destructive aims that are basically an even worse form of tyranny under a new ideology, like the case of the Soviet Union. So if you go through this whole series of revolutions, whether it's the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, a wide variety of other revolutions throughout American history, you'll find throughout world history, you'll find very few examples of a successful revolution. The American Revolution is striking in this regard. And what I want to argue is that the reason the American Revolution succeeded is because revolution is a process of destruction, and it only succeeds if it's immediately and closely followed by a process of construction, a process of building up. Revolution doesn't succeed unless it's followed immediately by constitution. The American Constitution of 1789 is what prevented us from descending into the kind of anarchy and unending bloodshed that many other revolutions descended into. Without that Constitution, without that process of creation, the exact opposite process of the destruction that took place in the revolution, we would not be where we are today. If you look at the French Revolution, they never were able to establish a new constitution, and they led to a reign of terror and then to Napoleon. If you look at the Russian Revolution, the provisional government never established itself as a true legitimate government. That led to civil war, then the Bolshevik Revolution, Marxism, and eventually even worse, Stalinism. America does not need a revolution right now because we are at such a low point of our power to build things up that if we had a revolution right now, we would just have rubble. If you really wanted a revolution, you need to be a builder, not a destroyer first. And the American revolutionaries spent decades, even centuries, you could argue, building up tools of self-government so that when it came time for them to build something new on the rubble of what they had just destroyed, they built something that was better than what they had destroyed. That is a rare condition, and it's not one that we meet today at all. In closing, I just want to recommend to all those who are interested in this idea that if you really want to change things, you have to build before you destroy, or develop your capacity to build a new and better system before you destroy the one you have. I recommend a book by a conservative. I'm not a conservative in the obvious sense of the word, but I like this writer. His name is Yuval Levin. The book is called A Time to Build. And his basic argument is we have so many institutions that have lost their legitimacy that our instinct is to destroy those institutions. But that's the exact opposite of what we need. Instead, we need to build new institutions that can command legitimacy, that can have the trust of the American people, and those are the foundation for a future more just, more prosperous, and more happy America. With that, I yield to questions.
Thank you. Is there a question from our panelists? Alan, you can ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to ask, why is it after our American Revolution, to my knowledge, there were no executions of any of our enemies? Even Benedict Arnold, who betrayed us, we set free.
Make it a question, please.
Would you explain why there are so many millions of executions in social justice countries, France, Russia, Germany, China?
Please make it into a question, or I'm going to have to move on to someone else.
Sure. Why are there executions in social justice countries and not the American Revolution?
Thank you. 1 minute to answer.
Well, so I'll defer to the historian on whether there were many executions after the American Revolution. I can't say I have the detailed knowledge of it, but I do think that I agree with the thrust of his question in that most revolutions result in mass executions, mass bloodshed, civil war. That is the consequence of most revolutions. One of the reasons why I think those who are eager for revolution are really just getting ahead of themselves and don't know what the fire they're playing with is. And as to why America didn't have that situation, if that's the case, and like I said, I don't have that depth of historical knowledge to know, but I do know that we didn't descend into the kind of mass bloodshed of like the French Revolution. I would say it's exactly what I was arguing, because there were systems of self-governance that preceded the revolution. They basically built a new country and a new government and then threw off the old one, rather than throwing off the old one and then trying to figure out where they're going to go from there.
Thank you. And now a question from our audience. I see a question from Tom Cook, and I think my Q&A people are going to make it possible for Tom to ask his question. Well, technical difficulties, my staff says. So I will ask the question on Tom's behalf, which is, what are the speaker's thoughts on the recent revolution in Ukraine?
Man, for saying that I'm not a historian, I'm getting a lot of historically specific questions. Without pretending to a deeper knowledge than I have, I will say that I know a little bit about the former Soviet Union. I lived in Russia for about a year. And one of the things that is notable in the former Soviet Union is that the kind of institutions that provide the foundation for stable self-governance just weren't there. And so though I can't tell you specifically whether the Ukrainian revolution seems to have gone well or poorly, I get that there was corruption, and I get that there was a mass uprising, but I can't tell you in the long run what the outcome will be. I can say that the same prescription applies. If you want to have a revolution, first build a new government, build institutions of self-government, build a stable foundation before you destroy the thing that holds order, but even if that thing is not what you believe in. Also, I'm going to go read more about the Ukrainian Revolution. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, jazz hands for our speaker. Moving right along. Our next speaker is Lukowski. is a former New Yorker turned Southern California beach resident. She's currently the chief marketing officer for an early stage tech company. She spent 15 years as a crisis and turnaround specialist, working with boards and executive leadership of public and private and government and nonprofit organizations. When she's not working, spending time with her large family, she enjoys volunteering, reading, cooking, running, and working on her golf game. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Today, I believe that America is at a crossroads. The majority of us, contrary to what we might see on TV, agree on many things. Nearly 2/3 of eligible American voters wish we had more than two options and were dissatisfied with those options presented to us by both parties. On issues involving everything from education to financial opportunity to voter disenfranchisement to race to the environment and immigration, a majority, a greater majority of Americans share not only common desired outcomes, but support common solutions. Yet many of us remain silent in today's climate. More than 80% of college students surveyed are self-censoring on campus and feel less comfortable discussing opinions on ideas that may be deemed disagreeable to their professors or with the campus norm. That's up from 60% in 2020. And more than 60% of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, fear expressing their opinion in the face of what is deemed correct or popular. The entrenched politicos give us limited binary choices, and we're told by one side or another that there is a correct one and a wrong one. Pick the wrong one, propose something different, or agree with something the other side says, and you're a traitor, a bigot, or an extremist. I've heard many of my fellow braver angels share with me from both sides talk of fearing or actually losing friends, family, jobs for having the audacity to support a middle ground or express a viewpoint that may be alternative or different than the accepted norm dictated by both tribes. As a daughter of an immigrant who lived through the Cultural Revolution, where the silent majority sat in fear and silence as their government and leaders proceeded to systematically silence groups of people and redistribute in the name of progress and equality, and that equality does not exist today in that country, I am in the affirmative for a new revolution, one where the silent and most of us seething common sense moderate majority rises up to fight against a culture of blamehood and victimhood that assumes the worst of intentions on both sides and feeds polarization and is fed by a political industry that is designed to limit voters' options to options for who stays in power. Voter disenfranchisement and the lack of reporting transparency on issues of voter disenfranchisement in all its forms. Mega bills that are hundreds to thousands of pages long that are filled with hidden, unreported, and unvetted programs, and often not fully comprehended or understood by our elected officials and news media. The revolution would be directed at 3 initiatives, and they would be systemic. Encourage the adoption of open primaries, runoffs with the top 5 candidates competing in elections and ranked choice voting. 2, promote laws that ensure that only those legally eligible to vote can easily and reasonably register, cast their ballot, and with the confidence that their vote is received and accurately counted. In addition, require that election officials in all states provide transparent public reporting on complaints of disenfranchisement and how they're handled and resolved. And finally, require that all congressional bills be no more than 100 pages, including a plain English summary that indicates what existing laws and programs are impacted. And just as Wall Street analysts have to disclose their biases and their sources, so should our media have to disclose where their information came from and their sources and who they donated to. So on that note, I will complete that's the end of my statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A question from a panelist. Stephen, you can ask to me.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd be curious how the speaker would square her suggestion that media should report their sources with the First Amendment and more generally protection of those sources in the media.
Thank you. 1 minute.
I think that's a great question. As a former aspiring journalist, I would say that the prior me would have probably said, yeah, we need to protect our sources. But the reality is that too often we see in the news media today that unnamed sources, and the problem with the 24/7 news cycle, which is really more of a 30-second news cycle now, is that oftentimes reporters continually rely on the same sources, and we don't know who those sources are. We also don't know what their agenda is. And so to that degree, I think it is worth it to say, if there is an unnamed source, that we have a disclaimer on it that says, listen, we're not going to name the source, but we do know that that source may have an agenda in revealing this information that we're publishing. Just like a Wall Street analyst has to say, my bank has a relationship with this company, and therefore I may be slightly biased in terms of how I what I'm suggesting, why you should invest in this stock.
Thank you. While we're still getting our system working with how the audience puts in their questions into the form, here's a question from the audience. The speaker mentioned the silent common sense moderate majority rising up. Would you say that is kind of a paradox? And how would the speaker address that?
It is a paradox, and it's one that I struggle with. I am a moderate, I describe myself as a moderate, compassionate conservative. I voted for neither candidate in 2 elections. In fact, in the last 2 presidential elections, you could say I pissed off both sides. So, but I believe that if more than close to 2/3 of Americans aren't satisfied, we need to stop subscribing to the myth that you're wasting your vote. Our vote is the only bullet we have from our Constitution that actually allows us power over our government. And so if we don't use that bullet wisely, then we will continue to get the outcomes that we have. So.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, jazz hands for our speaker. Woohoo! Our next speaker is Stephen Gass. Steve is an inventor who has degrees in physics and law. He practiced patent law in Portland. He has over 100 inventions to his name. And he invented a technology for table saws that if a user accidentally contacts a saw blade, it stops. It retracts the blade so quickly that the typical user walks away with basically a paper cut instead of an amputation. His company was an industry leader in offering living wage positions and full benefits to even entry-level employees. And he owns a working farm south of Portland, Oregon. Steve, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to share my thoughts here. Well, in the immortal words of Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. Actually, for purposes of our discussion today, I think it is more accurate to say that life is like a game of Monopoly. Why Monopoly? Everyone living in America is a player in an economic game, rolling the dice and working our way around the board, trying to accumulate wealth or at least survive through skill and luck. The game of Monopoly is intentionally designed so that as play progresses, most of us get poorer and poorer, while a few begin to accumulate and hoard all the property and money. Eventually, there can be only one winner. The rules are written to inevitably achieve this outcome. All the players but one will be obliterated, and the one victor will be richly rewarded. Oh, how we Americans cherish such come from nothing to win it all narratives. It makes for a great movie, script, and a rousing, if cutthroat, family game night. But it makes a disastrous, unstable framework for a society. If nearly all of us fail in the end, so too does our republic. Beginning in the 1980s, our country experienced an economic revolution led by President Reagan. The Reagan-esque view of the world is that the government is the enemy. No tax rate is too low, free market is king, and companies are best left entirely unregulated. In this version of America that came to preeminence, the societal goal was to make some fabulously wealthy with the idea that the benefits would trickle down to us all. As a result, our society has been playing an economic game where the rules have been fostered vast wealth accumulation and vast wealth disparity. The wealthiest Americans amass enough wealth in a single generation to build spaceships to put themselves into orbit as a hobby, while millions of their fellow countrymen can't afford healthcare, education, or housing. This economic disparity is exactly akin to what happens when you play a game of Monopoly. The rules of Monopoly are designed so that one person wins, that is, ends up with all the money. This is exactly the trajectory our country is on at present. Those with wealth are capturing exponentially more, while those at the other end of the economic scale struggle to meet basic needs. It doesn't have to be this way. In either Monopoly or our country's economic system, the distribution of wealth is not some manifest destiny of capitalism. It is simply the natural byproduct of the rules we, through our elected representatives, put into place to govern the operation of our society. We need a counter-revolution to recover from the failed trickle-down policies of the last 40 years. We need a counter-revolution to change the rules of the economic game we are all playing. Instead of viewing government as the enemy, we need to recognize government as a manifestation of our collective will and use it to establish rules that will create a better society for the most people. We need to use the tools of governments, corporate regulation, tax policy, and government appropriations to things like education, social safety nets, and universal health care to intentionally create reduced wealth inequality. The rules must be changed so that the economic game we all must play inherently generates an outcome we can all live with and benefit from. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. And a question from our panel. Ellen. Unmute, please, and ask your question to me as the chair.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm wondering how the panelists would feel as a business owner about the idea of reverting to a tax code that did redistribute wealth more equally when those who owned businesses or prevailed in society were taxed at even up to like 90%. How would he feel about returning to that?
And 1 minute to answer.
It's a good question. I think many people seem to be afraid of that. I'm not. I don't want to be the only one taxed at high rates, but I think the benefits of higher taxation on those who benefit the most from our economic system is really the only way to end up with a more just and balanced and stable society, because ultimately it isn't workable to have a game of Monopoly where one person ends up with all the money. It won't work as a country and a society.
Thank you. And we have a question from a member of the audience, Michael Deichmiller, and I'm going to invite him to unmute and ask his question. So, and if you're using a, thank you. And can you spell out, if you're using a, an acronym, spell it out so everyone understands. Go ahead and ask your question to me.
Sure, thank you. I was just wondering if the panelists thought that universal basic income would be an answer to disrupt the monopoly game of our current economic structure.
Thank you. 1 minute.
I think it's one of the tools that's available. I think there are, as I mentioned, a number of different tools in terms of both tax policy of where we get the revenues that we have in the government and how we spend them. And one of the ways that we could spend them would be through universal basic income. I actually don't claim to know enough to know whether that's the best way. I'm neither sort of opposed nor supported at this point, but it certainly is an available tool that is worthy of very close consideration.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Woo. Jazz hands for our speaker. Okay, our next speaker is Steve House. Steve describes himself as a guy who has done stuff. Part of what that is that he is a Republican and former state chairman of the Colorado Republican Party. He was a candidate for the United States Congress in 2020, and his background is primarily in healthcare. And he is Braver Angel's Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives. Steve, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe America is already having a revolution. The violence and bloodshed everyone worries about is already here. I believe a revolution is the only hope we have of not having a catastrophic bloodshed in our future. I don't want America to fail, but the momentum forward is strong and gaining speed, in my opinion. I believe the failure is rooted in declining respect for truth and morality. People don't respect life and liberty, and the Constitution depends on those things to be successful, in my opinion. When I saw the Democratic Party, and they are by no means the only culprit in our current destructive path, when they took out the words of under God in the Pledge of Allegiance in at least 2 of their caucuses at the 2020 National Convention, I knew we were in even more serious trouble than I thought. One nation under God, indivisible, is exactly how it was written and how it was intended. Our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution prescribe the right to life, liberty, and happiness sourced by inalienable rights provided by God. Take out God, as we're seeing so often in society today, and you put our one nation at risk of failing to be indivisible, and you render our Constitution to be nothing more than an old document. Just 10 years ago, 77% of Americans identified as Christian or spiritual. We have lost 12% of that as of today. The lack of morality and truth are critical problems leading us toward the revolution I think we're already in. If you suspend truth and make people believe that stealing $900 or less is not a crime in places like San Francisco, then any truth you want to create becomes fair game. The people in this country know that one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not steal, and that X and Y chromosomes determine gender, not a doctor. And they know those things while having compassion, just as I do, for people who struggle with poverty or gender identity. At some point, if people are told that what they believe is wrong often enough, they will no longer believe anything you tell them, because down deep, they know your agenda is corrupt and they will take a stand against it. I think they'll revolt against it, because I cannot be who I am if what I know to be true is penalized or censored just because I state the truth. Barely a quarter of Americans approve of Congress right now, in a representative government where 3/4 of the people do not believe they are properly represented. You won't have any choice on whether to have a revolution or not. It's already here. If the government has the power to create victims by supporting those who would victimize them, then that government should not stand. When you allow someone to steal from someone else without penalty or prosecution, you create a victim by supporting the victimizer. I don't care what rules you vote to adopt. A person with an X chromosome should not be competing in sports with those who do not have one. Being told that they are insensitive because they won't accept that, and they know it is not true, only makes them more angry and less accepting of the government that they voted for. Anger is on the pathway to revolution for sure. We can change. We can be better. It's always possible, but will never happen if you use force, censorship, or coercion to get me to act in ways that are not in my self-interest. That's the beauty of democracy in the first place. Self-interest can be practiced by all at a detriment to none, unless the government gets to choose who wins and loses. Today, there are 4 specific secession movements that I'm aware of taking place in our country: Texas, Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, and a county in Colorado. What will we do if Texas votes to secede from the United States? What should we do? Self-governance and self-determination are both part of the original intent of the Constitution and founding philosophy. After all, the voters of Texas, don't they have the right to determine how they want to be governed? Revolution could involve an escalation of violence from what we already have, and I don't want to see that. It may also end up creating 2, 3, or even 4 countries where there once was one. While that may sound crazy and pessimistic to many, the situation we're in right now does not appear to be one we can vote ourselves out of, in my opinion. The federal government is operational outside the Constitution, and the desire now to pack courts to allow it to be even more powerful is condition enough for us to break the bonds of government and exercise our liberty once again. It's time for a revolution. It's already started. Pray that it will be nonviolent, and prepare for the idea that it might be violent. My children and grandchildren deserve to live in a place that honors the truth and allows them to decide for themselves what risks they will take and how they will worship God.
Thank you. A question from the panel. EE?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the speaker is, if we're already in a revolution, which I agree we are, how can we change this course? What would the speaker suggest we do in terms of changing this course?
Thank you. 1 minute.
I think, E, that what Braver Angels does is one of the keys. I don't think going into the halls of Congress, and I've had that opportunity as a former state chairman and a candidate, I don't think going into the halls of Congress is going to change it. I think every county, every city, every municipality that has an opportunity to learn how to create, compatible strategies and collaborative talk, once they do that, I think we have an opportunity of forming. It's somewhat the way Silas talked about having a new plan, if you will. We can form that, but we've got to do it at the grassroots level and move it up. I don't think we can wait on Congress to do it for us, and I don't think they'll ever be successful at this point.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Barbara, you may unmute and ask your question to me. There you go.
We have multiple Barbaras. Perhaps you could just.
Barbara Brown from Houston. Go ahead.
So Madam Chairman, we have two versions of revolution. We have the social justice version, which says that that's the problem. We have the version that Steve has just given us, which says we're all unhappy with what's going on in this country today. And we've already had violence from both the left and the right in the past year and a half on that, and that we're already there. How can we reconcile those two and get on with changes that might actually be beneficial to the majority of Americans?
Thank you. 1 minute.
I think quite honestly, I talked to the folks in Texas who have a program called TextIt, and I wonder if what we really need to do in this country right now is we need to allow people to talk about things that we don't really want to talk about. I mean, maybe we do need to talk about what happens with secession. Maybe we do need to talk about what happens with, the growing dissent about vaccines and the virus and the different things that are going on, instead of suppressing that. I don't like the fact that social media suppresses so much of that, because what happens is people bottle up their frustration and they don't get it out. And there's that kind of frustration exists on both sides. And so I think we have to figure out how to actually have a conversation about it without worrying. One of the greatest examples of downfalls of a democracy is when the people who are in power no longer believe that the democratically controlled process will serve them, so they change the rules. We're seeing a lot of rule changes that prevent those conversations. And I think if we don't fix that, we're going to see an even more rapid revolution arise.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Just hands for our speaker. And again, to the audience, as we've been placing in the chat, if you would like to ask a question of the speaker, this turns around really fast in real time. Use the form, the link that is in the chat. Our next speaker is Jan Krist. Jan is an award-winning singer-songwriter and artist from Detroit, Michigan. She has twice been a finalist in the Kerrville New Folk Competition. She has had favorable reviews in Billboard Magazine and Entertainment Weekly, Chicago Sun, and others. Now in Fort Wayne, Indiana, she performs regularly as a solo artist and also with other musicians and with her band. And she is a wonderful mentor to new songwriters. She has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Indiana University, and she sits on the Fort Wayne Arts Commission. Jan.
Thank you. I know that our thesis here is supposed to be pro or con revolution, but this word revolution, I think, is a misnomer. And I think what's actually being bantered about in the far wings of the parties isn't revolution, which is a total and complete change in form, like from communism to democracy, but is actually the romanticized word for civil war, a war between opposite sides of the same country. Mitch Albom was talking about this in his column last week, and he said that these two sides don't want to just argue with each other. They want to vaporize their opponents. Civil war. Our form of government was designed to avoid all of this through the continuing series of bloodless coups known as elections, where parties peacefully transfer power to the winner, and it worked for over 200 years until January 6, 2021. So what happened? I would suggest that we've been bewitched by misinformation, lies, and polarized by the resulting hatred. Hillary drinks baby's blood. Trump is the Manchurian candidate. Salacious recon flooding the webs and the airwaves and holding us all, zapping the trust right out of us. And even when our own parties are the ones who are counting those votes, we don't believe it. And even when I stand in front of my cousins and I stand there and I tell them what I believe and what I think, they look at me and they say, no, here's what you believe, because they know because that's what talk show radio hosts and all kinds of media have told them, I believe. Case in point, gun control. Obama, Biden, Pelosi have all said, we don't want to take your guns away. We just want accountability so that we don't have people dying in schools, grocery stores, movie theaters, nightclubs, concert venues. Accountability. But fear and lies tells you, no, 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 they want to take away our guns. That's what they're going to do. And we have seen what this kind of paranoia can do. We saw it in when Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols killed 168 people, ages 3 months to 70 years, when they bombed the federal building in Oklahoma. Lies mixed with truth, misinformation, fear, hate, these are the forces that bring us to this ledge. So we need to ask ourselves, who benefits from a US at war with itself? Who steps into that power vacuum? And I believe when we start asking ourselves the correct questions, we will start to get some answers. And I want to go on record here and say that if you approve of, encourage, or affirm the notion of this civil war disguised as a revolution, you are complicit in the destruction that those that feel your nod as a rubber stamp commit. We should be acting more like battlefield medics than sideline pundits and cheerleaders. This is not 2 chapters in a history book or a musical or a movie. It doesn't inspire hope, and it does not affect positive change. This is Pandora's box. We need to find the us in the US, identify the sources of the lies and hate, purge it from our sanctuaries and our bully pulpits, and find ways to love our brothers and our sisters and save this nation.
Thank you. I want to remind our audience that if you have a question for Jan, that you would use the forum to send that to our Q&A staff while I ask a panelist for a question. And I'm going to call on EE. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jan, for your wonderful and thoughtful speech. I agree with you that, I guess, how can we change our options when currently our election systems are structured in a way where it is nearly impossible for us to have competition in terms of choices as to who to vote for and new ideas? We seem to be limited to a binary thing. And so I'm wondering, how would you propose that we non-violently change those options when the structure itself is so rigid?
Thank you. 1 minute.
In the 90s, there was this real push for the moral majority to send people into the system and to begin to run for office and be part of government in order to be part of the solution. And that was a conservative movement. And I believe that both conservatives and liberals need to rethink this again. The system has the answers. We need fresh blood. We need to be part of it, to enter into it in order to be part of the solution.
All right. And currently I don't see an audience question. So Ellen, did you have a question for Jan?
I did. I very much respected the things she was saying and very much appreciated this idea of asking correct questions. I wonder what the panelists might suggest would be a good question to start with that we could ask of each other across an aisle that might help us best understand the perspective of those with whom we disagree.
Thank you. 1 minute.
I think it's part asking the questions, and the other half of that is that we have to actually listen to each other. As I said, my cousins will tell me who I am and what I believe, and I will tell them, no, that's not who I am and what I believe. They will not believe me. So part of it is for us to offer, as one of the other speakers said, honesty, to be honest in our exchange. And the other part is people have to listen to us and take us in that way. I mean, what does it benefit me, to lie to you about who I am and what I want in all of this? I'm not getting paid for this. I'm giving my heart here. And so we need more exchanges like this, I think. We need people who will listen openly and speak honestly.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you. Jazz hands for our speaker. So before we go to our next round, we're going to have a poll. And then after the poll, we've asked Jan if she would share one of her songs with us live. So while she's getting ready for that, Cliff, can you do the first poll? All right, we're going to invite everybody to answer this poll. Uh, 10 more seconds. All right. So I think I might be seeing something different than everybody else sees. Can you see the results there? Ellen says yes. Okay. So which of the questions below interest you most? We had 82% participation in this poll, which is great. And what are the alternatives to revolution is one of the things that we're most interested in, but we're also interested in good outcomes and making America stronger. And good questions. All right, so let's end that poll. And Jan, will you grace us with a song and tell us just a sentence about it?
Thank you. I'm honored to sing for you. This is a song called Hope, and hope doesn't belong to any one party or any one place or any one person. That is the sentence I will say. Let's talk about fear, being afraid, and the toll that it takes on us every day. Pain, grief, and doubt, and the way that it pulls us inside out. When you think that nothing is gonna change, it just leaves you prisoner to the pain. But what makes the abused refuse to back down? What makes the broken stand their ground? What makes the heart start to believe? What is the gift that faith receives? What is the soul of the mystery? And what breaks the hold of brutality? Hope, eyes wide open, hope will unbroken. Hope. And let's talk about what can be that were done, and faith in something bigger than us, more real than the people who vie for our trust. 'Cause trust has been abused, truth has been betrayed. So how's anything ever gonna change? Oh, what makes the abused refuse to back down? What makes the broken stand their ground? What makes the heart start to believe? What is the gift that faith receives? What is the soul of the mystery? And what breaks the hold of brutality? Hope, eyes wide open, hope will unbroken hope. It's hope with its eyes wide open, hope will unbroken hope. It's hope, eyes wide open, hope will unbroken.
Thank you,
That was beautiful.
Jan. Thank you. So we continue our conversation. We're going to have the panelists go around in more or less reverse order, starting with Steve House and then Steve Gass and on. And it's just 2 minutes each, no questions. And we're building on what we have already heard. So Steve House, can you lead off, please? And it's 2 minutes.
I would be happy to, Madam Chair. I think that there's an important reality that we're hearing about tonight and that we see in America right now, which is we don't know how much more time we have. We don't know how much more time we have the way we're operating this country. The divide in this country is so unbelievably difficult as we speak. And, when you have people who are, getting vaccinated, mad at people who are not getting vaccinated, and the virus has taken a toll on everybody's psyche because we've been locked up for a long time. But that's not the only issue. The issue is in how we perform in government and what government's role is needs to be redefined. The bottom line is do something. I talked to Alan Keyes the other night, who's a former presidential candidate in the US. And he said, Steve, I honestly don't know. Do we have a year? Do we have 2 years? Do we have 5 years? He said, you got to do something now. There's no reason to wait. Get involved, find someone to talk to, ask better questions. The America that I live in, it could come through a revolution and be okay. But I really, really think that our best opportunity right now is to take the time to ask questions and engage other people. And don't start out with, I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, so I don't like you. I mean, that's the essence of what we do at Braver Angels, is to solve that problem. But figure out what their humanity is all about first. And once you figure out what someone's humanity is about, then have a conversation. Because if we don't do this, it's going to be much worse next year if we're here at all. And I just implore you, go out there and do something now, because we don't know how much time we have. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you tonight. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Steve Gass and then EE. Steve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the challenges we face in the country now is that people so often are focused on their freedoms without realizing that those freedoms are not free. They come at the cost of someone else's burden, a burden to someone else. So one of the issues that was mentioned for instance, in gun control is, your freedom to have a gun comes at the cost of my risk of being shot with that gun. And so it's not a one-way street. Each freedoms have to be balanced against each other. And so your freedom not to be vaccinated has to be balanced against my freedom to be free of the virus, of exposure to the virus. And we have responsibilities to each other in society. It's not all me first and me only. We have to consider and give weight to what the impacts of our choices and our freedoms are on our fellow Americans. And I think, I hope that we come to a point where we realize that that is important and something that we need in this country. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And next is EE, and after that, Silas. EE?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, as my old boss used to say, you keep doing what you keep doing, then you will keep getting what you're getting. And to that effect, we've keep on voting for the same two parties, and we keep getting what we've been getting, and it's gotten worse. And this revolution was not, as several of my fellow panelists said before, we're already in a revolution. We are already in a crisis in our country. And this revolution was not, and this crisis was not the product of one party. But you are not going to change anything by trying to work within a system that has already been rigged. And I highly encourage folks to read, if you want to refer to a book that talks about real systemic change that can help improve the choices that we have when we go to the ballot box, I highly recommend The Politics Industry, an excellent book. And the other thing I highly recommend people to watch is With My Last Breath, which is a recent documentary about comparing the Chinese and the American government in their response to COVID, because it shows a stark reality, which is that we are not that far from the type of control that our government is issuing on us is not that far from what China does to its own people. So anyway, on that note, we need a revolution. We need a systemic change in terms of how we vote for people, what options we're given, and creating more options for voters throughout, and more competition will give us better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Silas, and then Alan. Silas?
The word revolution sounds sexy, but I think Ms. Krist made an excellent point in that it's more often a disguise for civil war. Without some institutions to mediate conflict, that conflict becomes war of all against all. What other choice do we have if the system isn't working? Well, actually, Lukowski just gave us a wonderful one, because we need more than two options. So if we really want to preserve the system that we believe in and we have to create some means for it to change. There's a quote from Edmund Burke. A state, and by the way, Edmund Burke, serious conservative for those who aren't acquainted. A state without the means of some change is without the means of its conservation. We have a system that is immune to change right now because we only have two options. So if we adopted structural reforms that could allow more than two parties, we could create new options and create solutions that are not currently available to us. We don't have to destroy our government. For those who don't believe that can happen, New Zealand in the 1990s faced this exact question and moved from a system just like ours that promoted two parties to a multi-party system very successfully and with much better outcomes ever since. That can happen in America. And if you're interested in specific options about that, a book I would recommend is called Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, which its title kind of gives you the point. But the reforms that Ms. Lukowski recommended would do the job. We don't need a revolution, but we do need a structural change that allows for more than two options.
Thank you. Alan Jackson, and then Ellen. Alan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleasure to be here tonight. Just on a quick lighter note than a serious note, two of my favorite satires, films, somebody might enjoy. One's a satire on capitalism called Being There. Actually stars Melvin Douglas, and he also stars in the other with Greta Garbo from 1939, Nanuchka, a satire on social justice. So enjoy those. But then as I was researching for tonight, many hours I spent preparing for tonight, looked up list of revolutionaries over history. I was surprised to see there's a list of 10, 20, 100. And my sense was the greatest revolutionary is the one that we started our calendar dating on 2021 years ago, that revolutionary. And our holidays in our country, most of them based on his birth and the importance of his life and his teaching. And so I would just conclude with what he said real simply, holding that coin, rendering to Caesar what's Caesar, to God what's God belongs to God, and to love each other as he loves us.
Thank you. Ellen, Urbani, and then David. Ellen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to address real quick the poll that we just took and speak off the cuff in reference to that question that most of the people participating tonight have: what are the alternatives to revolution? And kind of riffing off of my original focus, which was the concerns about consolidation of power. I would suggest that campaign finance reform might be something that we could look at from both sides of the aisle as a means to right the ship without requiring violent or revolution otherwise. It could certainly be argued that current practices consolidate power more than they distribute it among average Americans, and that balancing that out might offer each of us a sense of more power and the practical, actual practical power in being able to kind of look at multiple party systems, look at more candidates than we are currently seeing when put forth during elections. I would also say one other alternative to revolution might be looking at the way in which we have as a culture come to mistrust what we might have considered previously to be established facts in favor of kind of what I call unestablished anecdote. And I think social media, while it's brought us a lot of benefits, has been a detriment in that case, where we are seeing each person being able to take some agency and authority to share information, but it is not vetted and it is not necessarily from trusted sources. And I think we heard panelists on both sides of the aisle referring to that as a problem tonight, where we just, how do we know who to trust and know that the information that is being shared among our friends and our communities is actually valuable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David, and then Jan. David?
Thank you, Madam. The people said they wanted to hear about alternatives, and I'd like to address one that's been brought up several times tonight, that the alternative is social justice and wealth redistribution. What always gets brought up in these discussions is the monopoly game. Winner take all and everybody else suffers. Of course, it is a game. It is not real life. But I'd like to say this. Let's stay with the metaphor. Let's stay with monopoly, winner takes all. When everyone promotes the social justice wealth redistribution, they never come up with a new game. It's leave it as the monopoly game, but after the end and someone wins, we'll take it and give it to who we think deserves it. Not a new game that has a more equitable outcome, but leave it right alone. And then talk about accumulation of power, take by government fiat what others have earned and give it to who I like. Now, the interesting thing is this has been tried. Places called Russia, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Cuba. And by the way, I've been going to China for 35 years, and I lived there for 5 years. This is not a topic I take lightly. And what's interesting in all those places, the new game didn't really work out, didn't really kind of benefit those at the bottom. The redistribution only benefited the oligarchs. And the only two places that have really pulled out of that reasonably are China and Vietnam. And what do? They adopted capitalist principles. They adopted free markets and open markets and the freedom to create. And China, with all of its issues, post-Mao, post-industrial revolution, and post the horrors of the Maoist age, literally lifted over 1 billion people out of poverty. And they didn't do it by communism. They did it by capitalism and free markets. And so that's a monopoly game that is maybe worth playing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jan, 2 minutes.
So much to try and say in 2 minutes. But I'm just going to keep it to this. I think that capitalism, we live in a capitalistic nation, obviously. Capitalism rewards greed, and greed is social and economic entropy on speed, and it has proven to be disastrous for our planet, for China and every other nation that has jumped into the pool there with the US. So we need balance. When it all comes down, yes, we don't want to change everything. We want people who work hard to be rewarded for their work, but we also want people who were prohibited from going to universities because of the color of their skin to get a little leg up now because they deserve it, because we kept them down, because we kept our knee on their necks. So we have to realize that, you know, balance is not only necessary, but without it, we can't move forward. It's our equilibrium. So I'm just going to end with that.
All right. Thank you. So we're going to go to a little more informal round for the next, 7 or 8 minutes. And what I'm going to invite the panel to do is, if you have something to say or a question to ask of me for another panelist, we can do that right now. So if there's something right in the front of your mind, panelists, that you want to say, I'm going to give everybody that wants to 1 minute, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand or your electronic hand so I can see you and get an extra minute.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
So is this an additional point, or is this a question, or either one?
It's either one. It's frighteningly informal, but we played well tonight. So I'm going to open it up a little bit among the panelists. So got something else to add? This is your chance. They're thinking, okay, David, and I'm going to limit these to 1 minute just for reasons of order.
Absolutely great. I have a love for this country and I have a passion for free market capitalism. It's not that it's perfect. It's not that it's not without flaws. There are, in any large system, always going to be flaws, weaknesses, injustices. But having spent the last 35 years of my professional life traveling to about 54 countries and actively working in many of the most challenging and difficult, including China and India and others, this still is the best system. And the revolution to restore it and take away the government power is where my passion is today.
Thank you. EE.
So just, Madam Chair, just so that I can clarify, can I make a quick statement and ask a question at the end of it for the other?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I've been a minority in every community I've ever been in. I've been a minority in terms of in work. I've been a minority in terms of the places I grew up in. And I've been a minority in terms of the fact that, it's, from a gender, from a race, from a political perspective, I've been a minority. And I'm also a 6-time loser when it comes to presidential elections. So I'm curious, because when I hear some of the previous speakers speak about wanting to redistribute wealth, wanting to, and racial inequality and all of these other things, I know what it's like to experience that from a firsthand perspective. I'm curious as to what informs them with regards to race inequality and income inequality, what personal and firsthand knowledge they have of those things.
Okay. While Stephen is about to address that, I just want to pause and say that Chris is putting a link in the chat to the evaluation, and you can just click on that link and let it appear on your desktop and do that later. But we wanted to make sure that we got the evaluation link to you. Go ahead, Stephen.
Well, I think the question, as I understood it, is what's the, well, in part, what's my experience for advocating for redistribution of wealth? And I would actually, the phrase I would use is more reduction of economic inequality. Anytime you change tax rates, you're redistributing wealth. Taxes, and which I think we all agree we have to have, is a redistribution of wealth. We take money from one place and put it in another. It's inherent in our society. We all get benefits from taxes. When you move off your driveway out onto the road, you benefit from taxes because that road is paved. I benefit from taxes. I see in my life the opportunities I've been given through government, and I've been able to get to a point of what many would call economic success and freedom. But I recognize that didn't come solely through my own efforts. It also came through the efforts of the people who work with me in my company and through the system that the government provides for and the stability that it offers.
Thank you. I can take one more panelist comment before we move to the next thing. And I see Silas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There have been many very interesting and exciting left-right baits thrown out there, and I'm going to refuse to take them all because I think that they are kind of like what's happening in our politics, a distraction from the bigger issue. Because the issue of revolution isn't about are you left, are you right? The issue of revolution is what rules will we determine how we answer these questions by. And so I just want to emphasize to everybody here that regardless of whether you're left or right, we can recognize that the rules that we have right now aren't serving us, and we don't have to scrap the whole system to change those rules. So I'd encourage everyone, regardless of what your answer to those very interesting questions that came up with, is to think about how we can build a system of rules that gives us more than two options, and that moves us in the direction of having solutions instead of having to just bicker without actually being able to change anything, regardless of what our very interesting thoughts on the other side of those questions are.
Thank you. So concluding this round, I want everybody to give jazz hands to, even if we can't see you, to our process and our panelists. And we have a couple other things that we want to do. And if you stay all the way to the end, which is 10 o'clock Eastern, we'll have another video performance from Jan. So here's our question. What was something you enjoyed or something that you learned? And I'm thinking like one sentence, one phrase, not a speech. And you don't get to say, I learned that the other side is really stupid. What was something you enjoyed, something you learned? Again, one phrase or a sentence. And I'm going to ask the panelists to raise their hands to share that. And the chat is now open for everyone to chat what you enjoyed or something you learned. And we do read that chat and we keep it as well. And it's fun to see it scrolling by. So panelists, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, something you enjoyed or something you learned. Ellen, and unmute.
I feel like one of the things I keep coming back to that I really appreciated, which I guess is enjoyed, was EE's reminder to all of us that, across so many issues, so many more of us agree as Americans on what we want, what we need, what we're in favor of, than disagree. And I think that sometimes, especially as Silas said, when there's sort of you feel like there might be some bait throwing out, or it's easy to kind of take a position. I appreciate being reminded that we probably have much more in common than we have differences.
Thank you. David.
Passionate, intense discussion on a volatile topic with complete civility. It's Braver Angels way.
All right. EE.
I love that I now have a whole new list to add to my reading list because, in terms of sources, because I am passionate about understanding what influences other people's viewpoints. And so thank you to those panelists, especially who talked about specific things that they had read. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Silas?
I really enjoyed Jan's song. I was like, man, I need to get out of the debate game and into the song game.
Thank you. Alan?
Right. Well, I just wanted to say again how much I appreciate Braver Angels' focus on marriage counseling and focusing us as a country that we're to celebrate that union, to extinguish our one-sided views for the betterment of the union of one as a country. So we're red, white, and blue, not red and blue, red, white, and blue.
Thank you. Jan?
I just want to say that it's interesting that we can have such diverse opinions about so many things and yet be so so in sync on things, on other things. And one of those things comes from yesterday when Steve held up his Nacho Libre helmet, and I thought, yes, Nacho Libre. I love that movie. So, you know, we have many of the same loves, many of the same passions, and we all love this country. So,
Thank you. Steve House?
I was actually surprised we weren't more creative, because I think that, you know, revolution where you're talking about economic, you know, like changing who has money and how you distribute it, but or voting systems are different, you know, to, you know, ranked choice voting and voting for having more than 3 parties. I think the revolution is more serious than that, and I think we should be thinking about how to be more creative with what are the other options might be.
Thank you. We're going to move to a poll now. Cliff is putting up our second poll, and you're going to have about a minute to answer that. How did it go for you? What did you like about the debate? This is multiple choice, so go ahead. All right, so looking at the results, number 1, what did you like about the debate? We saw truthfulness and honesty of opinions, respect shown to others, and all of these other things as well. Nice. Number 2, what I heard tonight affected how I think about the issue. You see the range there. Thank you. And then how is your thinking about the other side changed during the debate, whatever the other side might mean to you, whether you're more able to see how the other side or another side thinks. And we can just close that window. All right, so 2 more things. One is I'd like to call on Bruce McKenzie. Bruce is one of our debate moderators and debate staff. And can you tell us a little bit, Bruce, about how and why we should be involved in this movement?
Well, thank you, Cynthia, and thank you to the panelists and all the participants tonight for a delightful debate on a very difficult topic. That's what we do here at Braver Angels. We take on difficult questions and actually have constructive discussions about them. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I came to Braver Angels after the 2016 election because the prayer of St. Francis kept running through my head. It was just a portion of that prayer that says, seek to understand rather than to be understood. And I read a column by David Brooks that mentioned Braver Angels, and I discovered that Bill Doherty happened to be right here in my backyard. And I looked him up, and I actually participated in 3 workshops, red-blue workshops that he was involved in moderating. And at the end of the 3rd one, I said, I need to do more. And I became a moderator. I became an organizer. I got involved with helping Bill sometimes develop some of the workshops. One of my favorites is the Depolarizing Within workshop, and also became involved with the debates. I believe Chris is posting in there, if you'd like to be more involved with this as a result of this opportunity, please join our team. We'd love to have you with us. I met people through Braver Angels that I would have never had contact with before. And as a result of that, I have much richer friendships because I'm not in the silo anymore. David Iwinski, I probably would have never talked to David if I knew his background and some of the things that he says. But David and I have had absolutely delightful conversations in which we are both at loggerheads with each other, but we love what we talk about. And that's the nature of being an American. We love to be able to talk about these things, and we miss it. And these workshops, the debates, give us an opportunity to actually discuss these questions in a civil and constructive manner. Where else can you do that? This is the work of citizens. It really is the work of citizens in this country. Our founders called on us to do this. We need to do this. I found Braver Angels because I believe it was an answer to that prayer. I now seek to understand rather than to be understood. Please join us. It is a delightful organization, and you meet wonderful people that you may not have met before. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, there are about 50 people across the country actively working on specifically online Braver Angels debates. And at our community debates, sometimes we have 25 people working at once with debates happening in 4 concurrent Zoom rooms. It requires a whole lot. So big jazz hands for our debate staff. They are wonderful, and they are all volunteers, and we really, really appreciate them. So the next debate is 2 weeks from tonight, October 14th, and it's about COVID vaccine mandates. Like I said, we are timely, we take on the hard stuff in a respectful way, and I cannot wait for that debate 2 weeks from tonight. And registration is already available on the Braver Angels website. Just go to debates and you will find it there. All right, this has been so good. We are going to send you out with another song. We're not going to make her play again. We're going to play a video of Jan playing a song that she wrote for New Orleans. Take it away, and good night.
Here we go. 2, 3, 4. Without a hope, without a prayer, is anybody just sit. And so you gather up your heart and you try to muscle through, and you do those things you know love would do. And you say yes, you say yes, you say yes. Love is listening. You say yes, you say yes. Love is on its way. Love is on its way. And you say love will lay its body down. Love will be the holy ground. Love will bandage every wound. Love is gonna be here soon. Love will pull you up and in. Love will bring you back again. Love is here to testify, and love will act and not stand by. Love will lay its body down. Love will be the holy ground. Love will bandage every wound. Love is gonna be here soon. Love will pull you up and in. Love will bring you back again. Love is here to testify. Love will act and not stand by. Love will act and not stand by. Love will act and not stand by.
Thank you, Jan. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.